The Octane Gaming Gear combo from Cooler Master features 7 backlighting colors, turbo mode, a Vago 3050 optical sensor, along with 4 levels of DPI adjustment. Now you can pwn noobs without pwning your wallet. Click the link in the description to learn more.
Hey, what's up guys, JayzTwoCents here, and we are out of my office because we are doing, well, I don't know if I'd call it a car review because I'm not really reviewing the car. More or less, I'm just telling you guys about it. I wasn't even gonna do this video, but damn it, you guys were bugging the shit out of me saying you wanted to know something more about my car. All right, so here it is. This is my 2004 Nissan 350Z in America, Z33 everywhere else in the world, touring model. Now this thing is 11 years old, so it's got a lot of things going on with it that you would expect with an 11-year-old car. It's got some rattles, it's got some clunks, it's far from perfect, but I almost feel like that gives the car a little bit of character. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about, I guess, the performance of the car, how I feel about the car, my plans for the car. And one of the reasons why I didn't even want to do this video was the fact that the car is not where I want it to be. Now, I probably overpaid for this car just a little bit. In fact, this car, you can get them for right around 10 or 11,000 now in good shape. This one's got 109,000 on it. It had 108,000 when I bought it. But the fact is, the drivetrain on this car remains completely untouched. It's got the factory transmission in it, the factory engine. The engine is tight, compression is good, no trouble codes. In fact, he even had all the receipts for the work he's done for the car, which was a huge thing as a car guy myself. The rear end in this thing is actually a 3.37 rear end, or maybe 3.35, I believe, rear end ratio, which is, fortunately, it's not the 373s like I was hoping it would have had, but it still gets up and moves pretty nicely. Now, the thing that people were really disappointed about when I talked about this car was the fact that it is an automatic. Now, I looked and looked and looked and really considered getting a 6-speed manual. There was a day where I would have been manual or go home, bruh. But you know what? I'm older now, I'm a little bit more lazy, and I like to cruise around with my car, and traffic just is a bitch in this area. Now, the automatic that's in this thing is actually more of a semi-automatic. Now, it does have a completely auto mode, and then it has a semi-auto mode where you can actually shift up and shift down and override the transmission computer and tell it what to do. It's a little bit sluggish, it's not as crisp as I'd like it to be, but fortunately there are mods that we can do that will actually fix that problem in the future. Now, something I should have probably prefaced with is, I'm a car guy. I'm a computer guy, I'm a car guy, and recently a bike guy. I like automobiles. I like all cars. I'm not one of those fanboys that's gonna be like, oh God, JDM, no, screw JDM, it's all about Volkswagen, or it's all about Euro, or it's all about Honda, or gnats flying around. I like cars, and I like the fact that you can do just about anything you want with a car with the right amount of money. But this car had everything I wanted. It's got the VQ35DE engine, which is actually a very solid engine platform, very sought after. You can do a lot of mods to it. They perform really, really well when you do even just basic boosted mods, superchargers, still-in superchargers, vortex, turbos. They just wake up like crazy, and it doesn't cost a ton of money. The other thing is, it is a legitimate rear-wheel drive vehicle. In fact, the carbon fiber drive shaft in this thing is factory. I didn't even know that all Nissan 350Zs came from the factory with carbon fiber drive shafts. That actually kind of blew my mind, considering you know, I'm used to American rear-wheel drive cars that just had big, giant, heavy steel drive shafts, where getting a lightened drive shaft was an upgrade. Don't think you can get much lighter than the carbon fiber in this thing. Now let's go ahead and talk about the wheels here. The wheels are a little bit of a point of conversation in their own right, because they are XXR, which is like a replica brand. I don't know what I'm gonna do with these. I'm looking at some inky rims. I'm also looking at some Koenig rims. But you know, I'm not tracking this car yet. This car has a lot more work that needs to be done to it before I can take this thing onto the track, so I'm not too worried about the fact that they're a one-piece cast rim and not forged yet. But you might notice in there we do have a Brembo kit. Now the brakes were one thing that I did upgrade on this car. Okay, now the brakes on this car are actually legitimate Brembos that were factory for this car, but not this exact car. Now, one of the things that made the 350Z or the Z33, depending on where you live, kind of unique was the fact that it had a lot of different SKUs that went along with it. You had the 350Z base, the 350Z Roadster, which was the convertible. You had the Roadster Enthusiast. You had the Roadster track. No, they didn't do a track car, but they did have the track car. They had the Touring. They had the Grand Touring. There was a ton of different models, but Nissan knew that people were going to take this car on the track. So they took a lot of the best features that they felt people would have done to the car on their own and made what they called the 350Z track model, which came with the Brembo brakes, and it came with better bushings, stiffer bushings in there, bigger sway bars, and everything about the car was beefed up when it came to the suspension. And that's exactly what I'm doing to this car now, is I'm converting this thing to a cornering monster. Now, going fast is fun, but I'm more about the turns. I've always been about canyon carving, road track. I live near Willow Springs. I like to road race. That's what I'm all about. So I've already started doing the white line bushing conversions on this thing, the Brembo brake conversion with the 14-inch front rotors and 12-inch rear rotors. Anyway, this thing stops on a freaking dime. The only down part is Brembo brakes are not necessarily the quietest. In fact, they're a floating pad. They kind of flop around in there a little bit because they're hanging on two posts. So they do have some trade-offs where they're not, you know, they do make some clicks and things, and you just gotta get used to that. They kind of give the car character. Now, before we talk about some of the interior stuff on this car, I just wanted to kind of show one of the reasons why I picked this car is this thing survived 11 years without as much as an aftermarket intake on this car. In fact, you go to the different Z33 forums, you'll find out that this is one of the best factory intakes on any car that's ever been designed. In fact, putting what the quote-unquote cold air intake, where you actually relocate the filter right here, and it's an open filament that's in the engine bay, has actually dyno proven to reduce the horsepower on this particular model because of the fact that this car is pulling in air from in front of the engine bay from behind the bumper. This right here leads right in from behind the intake of the front of the bumper and goes right up into there. So it bypasses all of the heat that's happening right here in the engine bay. So that's one of the reasons why I haven't switched this out, was because it would have cost me money to take away horsepower, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, unless you got a long intake that actually relocates the pipe through here and down behind the bumper, you're not going to gain anything. But I also don't think that's a good idea, considering one, you're going to expose your filter to water and debris, and two, changing the filter or putting new oil on it when it's behind the bumper is going to be a complete pain in the ass. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look inside the car. All right, here's the interior, and it's got just as much character as the rest of the car does, because it's not perfect. In fact, one of the first things I had to do to this car was take out most of the interior plastics because of the fact that they were scratched, cracked. It actually had a factory radio in it, which was really good, because a lot of the times you go to these aftermarket radio shops and they do a hack job on the wiring, so that didn't have to be worried about. But you can see right here in the, you know, on the, as I almost killed Coconut Monkey over there, we've got some scratches and things here. I have no idea how this happened, but at some point it did. Center console looks pretty good though, actually. Now the center console looks good because I took all the plastics out and refinished it myself. I sanded it all down, I primered it, I repainted it. Granted, I wouldn't have preferred painting the interior, but it was a much better alternative. But the center cubby here, they did have like an aftermarket TV thing back there, and as you can see, this is all messed up, it's broken, they hacked out, there's a big hole right here with hot glue everywhere. So I've got to replace this cubby compartment. Unfortunately, because that's one of the first things people destroy on the interiors, that piece is like $100 by itself, and usually it's just as scratched up as anything else. But I did put in a Kenwood receiver here. This is the DDX 372BT. Nothing expensive, it's all touchscreen. It does play DVDs, but I didn't hook up the parking wire because I have no desire to watch movies in this thing. So it can't play movies right now, but it could, I guess, if I hooked up that wire. I just wanted something that filled in the double din, looked nice, and was touchscreen. But other than that, everything inside works, and that was the most important thing. Seat heaters, which is probably kind of dumb. Look at the 57 Chevy that just drove in, actually. That's worth looking at. Yeah, that's nice. See, like I said, I'm a car guy. I like all automobiles. Even this Camry right here, this is badass. This lady right here, she's got it going on. But you know, everything in here works. It even has leather heated seats, because we all know in Southern California, heated seats are a must. But it does have one of the dumbest cup holder things I think I've ever seen right here. He's got his lab in there with him. That's awesome. The dog's like, "Do you even American, bro?" Now, the only real aftermarket part on this car is the HKS style exhaust. Pretty much it's an HKS true dual exhaust that's a knockoff because it doesn't have HKS stamped on it anywhere, but it's pretty much exactly the same. I went a step further and I had the resonators removed, and I kind of regret that a little bit because it did change the exhaust note, makes it a lot more raspy than I like. So I'm actually going to be putting in an NVIDIA Gemini dual exhaust on this thing, and no, that's not NVIDIA like the graphics card. It's NVIDIA, and we're going to be doing that soon, actually. So I looked at this video as being more or less kind of a video before the car is done. So I decided to do it that way. I had something to look back on when the car is done in the next year or two and can say, wow, the car's come a long way. So with that, let's go ahead and start up the car and let's go for a ride. Now, if I said this car wasn't a rough ride, that would be a complete lie. With the polyurethane bushings going in, it's got Megan racing coilovers. The car is definitely a little bit of a harsher ride, especially with the 32-point adjustment on there. But I like to keep things nice and stiff. Not to mention, the car is a lot of fun to drive. Now, I think overall, Nissan did a fantastic job with this car. I've had a lot of fun cars in the past. In fact, I had a 92 Z28 that was completely track ready. It was all custom suspension, and I had a 95 GSX turbo to clips. But this car from the factory seemed to have pretty much everything I wanted in a car already done to it. You know, with the factory strut brace in the front, strut braces in the rear, the massive roll bars on this thing. The steering is very tight. Everything about this car was clearly built for handling, and I think it does a fantastic job. Now, the steering wheel is a little bit stiff at times. They've got speed-sensitive steering in these cars, actually, where the faster you go, they stiffen up more so that you don't end up oversteering or really overworking the wheel. But at lower speeds, it is kind of hard to turn, actually. I recently hurt my right arm, and it made it difficult to actually drive this car because of how hard it is to turn the wheel at slower speeds. But I think Nissan knew ultimately that people were going to be using this particular car for a lot of like track days and things like that. And so they just built a car that I think gave everyone an amazing starting platform for building a car that's going to be all-purpose street, strip, and road racing. I admit, doing the Brembos was probably the best thing I ever did, because you never know when you have to stop on a dime. You can't deny, though, the fact that the Z33 and the VQ35DE motor in this platform has just been extremely popular. They built upon it with the 370Z, but of course the 370Z is much more expensive. The aftermarket parts for this thing are abundant. There's just tons and tons of things you can do to these cars. Supercharge, twin turbos, twin screw chargers. Anything you want to do to these cars you can. And they're fairly inexpensive to work on. Now, the initial cost on the car, about 10 grand. It's not cheap. It's definitely not, you know, a person that's on a very fixed incomes type of hobby. But the fact that this car, for about $15,000, $10,000 for the price of the car, $5,000 put into the car, you would have a car that would be so much fun to drive. You know, this is my weekend car, but I find myself driving it more and more. So unless I want to rack up the miles, I better just start kind of chilling a little bit. But this is an absolute blast to drive. I was a little worried when I first bought the car that I might have made a mistake, because I'm usually an American muscle car kind of guy. But the more I think about it now and the more I drive the car, I have zero regrets whatsoever. All right, well, you guys wanted to know more about my car. I just went ahead and threw together this little bonus video. I don't even know how good it's going to turn out. But anyway, it's time to get out of here, have some fun, and burn a little more fuel. So we'll see you next time.